This 45-minute webinar was developed to give you answers to some of the most common questions that we are receiving from subscribers here at DMS Retail. We do have quite a bit to cover in the next 45 minutes, so I certainly invite you to email your questions. If we can, we'll answer them during the webinar. If there's no time for that, then we'll certainly follow up with you later. Please be sure to add your email address after your question. Okay? So just to briefly run down what the agenda looks like, what topics we're going to cover. We're going to cover measuring and managing productivity in store, how to price right, identifying new products to sell, loss prevention, handling slow movers, interviewing, measuring productivity of sales and inventory, identifying new products to sell, explaining GMROI, measuring advertising effectiveness, and duties of the person in charge. Other topics can be added based on questions, but subject to time available. So let's begin with our first topic, which is measuring and managing productivity in store. One of the challenges of measuring productivity in a retail store is knowing exactly who should be measured and on what. And of course, there are different approaches to this. You can measure everyone based on the same KPIs, or key performance indicators, or you can measure each person based on KPIs that are relevant to the job function being performed by the individual. Measuring everyone based on the same KPIs works when all individuals have the same or at least similar duties and the same or similar opportunities. One of the advantages of this system is that it is very easy to see who is meeting expectations and who is not. It also lets you pinpoint who needs more training or possibly who may need to face some disciplinary action. And it also pinpoints who your top performers are, which of course is very important for scheduling purposes. If you're measuring everyone with the same KPIs, then SPH, or sales per hour, or sales to target, average sale per customer, and units per transaction would likely be the KPIs of choice. In this scenario, all employees are equally responsible for sales, customer service, maintaining the store, replenishing merchandise, taking care of displays, etc. Basically, all of the functions that need to be performed in the store. And it's up to management to ensure that no individual is burdened with more than their share of tasks that keep them away from customers. This is, of course, not as easy as it sounds, but it has to be done in order to maintain motivation. If it's not done, then associates will see management as unfair or playing favorites, and there will be no end to the chaos. If all associates do not have the same duties or opportunities to interact with and sell to the customer, then option 2 would be more appropriate. In this case, each individual is assigned a certain function and they are measured based on their performance in those functions. This is a luxury, as it can be very expensive, and many retailers do not have the budget for hours or wage costs that it would require. And generally speaking, it is the easier of the two options because it clearly defines job functions and measurements. One major drawback to separating functions is that some associates will not necessarily always behave in the best interest of the customer. You've probably seen that. For example, if one person is mainly responsible for merchandising, she or he may do the work and try to avoid customer interaction. This can be managed, but it is just something to look out for. So let's take another look at option 1, where all associates are responsible for all functions. In this case, it needs to be made abundantly clear to all associates that they are jointly responsible for the entire store operation, no exceptions. Naturally, when management is reviewing reports, they must take into account any special considerations. For example, if one particular employee was taken off the selling floor for an extended period of time to do some task in the back room, and other employees don't have to do the same, then that employee cannot really be expected to produce the same on that particular day. Again, management of the associates and the non-selling tasks assigned is extremely important. If the manager fails to do this properly, several things will happen. For example, KPI comparisons between associates will be meaningless. Associates will feel unfairly treated and will become demotivated. Competition between associates on the sales floor will be seen by customers, and it will damage the reputation of the store. Certain maintenance tasks will be shunned, and the store will suffer, and the list goes on. At DMS Retail, we recommend the first approach unless your store volume is very high and can fully utilize people for certain functions other than sales. Even then, every employee, regardless of function and job description, must drop what they're doing to assist a customer in need. All store associates should be responsible for all other store functions. We feel strongly that every single person working in the store should see customer service and sales as their first priority. But again, all associates must have the same duties and the same opportunities. Don't keep putting the same person behind the cash register or in the back room and then expect that person to have the same productivity in terms of sales per hour, average sale per customer, and units per transaction as those who get to interface with the customer all day. A note about KPIs and analyzing them. Don't fall into the trap of placing significant emphasis on only one KPI and making assumptions or decisions based on the results for that one KPI. Different KPIs will tell you different things, and you must always look at more than one to really make informed decisions. Placing too much importance on just one will probably mean that you're ignoring some very relevant data, and you will go wrong at some point. Of course, there can be exceptions to this, but always err on the side of caution and review groups of KPIs together. Okay, our next topic on how to price. I'll hand this over to Matt. Matt, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great.
I'm hoping that everybody can hear and see the screen clearly. There's a little box at the right in the control panel that you have on the side of your screen. If you don't hear or don't see the screen properly, please send us a little question. You can always send us a question through email, which is provided chat box right on your screen. So we want to make sure that everybody can see the screen clearly and hear the audio clearly. Okay, how to price? Price, obviously, one of the most important issues of retailing, and there's some very sophisticated ways of coming up with the right price, and we get into that in our training, like the retail management workshop and best practices in multi-unit management, etc. Requires some degree of business intelligence utilization, and pricing issue can get pretty sophisticated. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to stay at the basics and foundational level. So we're going to first of all look at cost. Obviously, you want to sell, if you want to stay in the business, you want to sell your product or service more than the cost incurred during the process. So you have to look at your cost, and it's not just the acquisition of the item, which is the price of the either manufacturer or wholesaler price point, but you should also consider what other expenses involved in bringing that unit item to your store, so that at the end of the process you have an accurate picture of your costing. So first and foremost, you got to know what your total cost is. Second thing you should look at is naturally competition. If the same item or similar items are being sold at your competitive stores, you have to be aware of what they're charging for the item, so that you're not totally out of market or out of competition in terms of your price is being too high. Obviously, if your price is too low compared to competition, you may be missing some profit margin there. So that's the second thing you got to look at. And if there's no competition on that item, and some fortunate retailers enjoy that situation, then you have to look at the overall value proposition. We call that what the market bears sometimes, or customers' perception of value. Ultimately, and the bottom line in any sales process, customer is exchanging their money for the value they're getting, either from the product or service, and sometimes we call it added value, the whole experience. So you have to look at what the customer is getting and what the customer's perception of the value of the item or the experience would be. Now, another thing you can take into consideration, and you should, depending on your objective, what do you want to achieve? In certain cases, this is applicable especially for existing operations. Going into a new market, your objective may be just to gain market share. So if you want to just gain market share and worry about profits later on, if you are in a financial position to do so, and that is the strategy you decided on, then you may keep your prices artificially low just to attract the customer and customer base because you are new in that specific marketplace. So those are the major considerations that you have to take into account before you can come up with the appropriate and proper pricing. Now, as I mentioned before, we have much more sophisticated layer. We usually go way deeper on this issue, utilizing market intelligence and the understanding of your specific and particular customer, and we can come up with certain algorithms that would give us different input in terms of how pricing should be finalized. But as I said, that's just another topic. It requires much longer time to cover. So these are the basic and foundation components of pricing. Now, the next question we received, how to identify new products to sell. First and foremost, simple one would be comments from customers, and customers would talk about their experiences in the store, the merchandise that they like, etc. Just through listening to your customers, you should be able to get some understanding of what they're looking for and what other things you may be able to bring in to satisfy their needs and requirements. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get outright requests. Customers will come to you and say, why don't you carry this stuff? Because I want to buy it from you. I get very high quality customer service in the store. I don't want to go somewhere else and buy it at some other place. Why don't you carry on? So that's a straightforward situation, which obviously you have to look at what the volume of requests are and number of other considerations, because obviously you don't want to bring product in just to satisfy one customer. But over time, you will develop enough information and enough input to decide what kind of expansion you're going to take in the store, the merchandising process. Now, one very powerful concept here is when you look at your very successful merchandise lines and categories, you can modify the successful products to give them some twist, some change, maybe different colors. We do that anyway automatically, but it could be a slight deviation from the standard product. So you can look at your successful product lines and see if you can add more of the same with slightly different specifications into the mix. And obviously, your employees and your suppliers are a very good source of information, and you get information from them on a daily basis, so you can take that into account. Now, there is a method in those countries where we have strong market intelligence and where we know our target customers and we have done our customer segmentation process properly. We have information on what other items our best customers are buying. this information in certain countries, unfortunately not all of the countries, is collected by government through census-type efforts, as well as private industry. There's a huge industry that collects customer intelligence, and in North America we have this information. We know certain type of customer, what certain kind of customer buys. So all you have to do, if you're in North America or in certain countries in Europe, you can go to that intelligence. Once you define your segmentation, your customers, A, B, C, or whatever, the way you segmented your customers, you can go to that intelligence pool and find out what other things they're buying. That would show you what other items you should be carrying, obviously. And that is the most powerful way of identifying new items to sell. So I hope this answered the question and how to identify new products to sell. And we're going to move to the next question now.
Okay, and that is all about loss prevention. So just to cover the basics here, shrinkage, of course, is internal theft, made up of internal theft, external theft, and paperwork errors. Internal theft, you would have processes for ensuring that people in your organization aren't going home with the merchandise every night or the money. External theft is all about shoplifting, and that's actually what we're going to focus on today because the question we had was more about handling shoplifting situations. And of course there are paperwork errors which happen, and during physical inventories those things are usually ferreted out to make sure that we have a nice accurate look at everything. Okay, so you know, store security and loss prevention are handled differently from one store to another, and certainly from one country to another. In some malls, you can find a security guard who's a store employee stationed just inside the front entrance to the store, and pretty much every store. In others, all employees are expected to guard against shoplifting. Now, while there certainly can be some benefits of having an employee stationed at the front entrance, first as a deterrent for would-be thieves, and second to avoid too many people entering the store, as is the case in North America anyway, during unusually high traffic volume days such as Black Friday and Boxing Day. But generally speaking, your best defense against shoplifting or external theft is to ensure that each and every associate in the store is well trained on all of the selling steps and best practices for deterring a shoplifter, with the use of the crucial steps in the selling process, which are used or should be used with every customer. Don't forget, you don't usually know that a human entering the store is not a real customer. You are paying attention to the customer and what they are doing. They know they are being attended to, and a customer who is actually a shoplifter will not like that. So greeting, approaching, etc. must be done with everyone entering the store. Often this alone will be enough to deter a thief. As for best practices in loss prevention, associates need to know what to look for, when to get help, what to do, etc. Things like watching for groups of well-dressed people who come in together and then immediately go in different directions in the store. If the store usually has only one or two staff members, then the would-be shoplifters know this because they've checked it out, and they know that if they head in different directions, the staff will be busy with some of them, leaving the others to steal at will. Another thing, usually a store is watched closely for some time before an expert team of shoplifters decide to steal from that particular store. We're not talking about the person who just suddenly and impulsively steals one thing. We're talking about the expert teams. You know, they look at things like store layout. They check to see if there are walls or private or blind corners that will help them out. They look to see if the staff are attentive, or if they're usually busy with tasks, with heads down and ignoring customers who walk in and out of the store, or are the staff greeting and approaching every customer who comes in. Shoplifters absolutely do not want to be attended to. They want to be left alone so they can execute their plan. So excellent customer service will deter shoplifters because it makes it impossible for them to do what they've come in to do, and they don't want to get caught. Many are in the countries illegally, and may have criminal records. They really will do anything to avoid the police. That is why when they realize that if they've been identified as shoplifters, if they know that you're suspicious based on suspicious looks, etc., or even the actions of the sales associates, like one running to the phone or calling someone over, they leave the store quickly and get away fast, usually in a vehicle that's very close by. One other thing associates have to watch for is the so-called customer who creates a major fuss about something or another. Maybe it's about merchandise, maybe they spill something. They'll do almost anything to create a distraction so their colleagues in crime can steal the merchandise. And one last thing that's really important, if employees suspect that they have shoplifters in the store, they need to take mental notes regarding appearance so they can help the police in a subsequent investigation. A description is always a good thing for the police to have. Now, we can't possibly touch on every area of LP in this short webinar, but suffice to say, if you expect your associates to be on the lookout and assist with loss prevention, which you should, then you must teach them certain things. It's got to be noted that many employees are uncomfortable with this, and some are actually fearful. That's why the very best defense in store is to ensure that every customer knows that they are being attended to. Not watched and followed and hounded, but attended to. And that means using the proper sales process with everyone. Employees who are worried about dealing with shoplifters need to be aware that they're not expected to act as police. Their role is to prevent shoplifting by attending to the suspect as if they were a regular customer. If the suspect gets away with merchandise, then the associates need to call police or mall security or do whatever your company procedures state that they should do. They need to be confident in the knowledge that they're not expected to apprehend criminals, and then that they should never confront or chase or jump onto the criminal to stop them. That's not their job. They're not law enforcement people. They have to protect the company's assets to the best of their ability without endangering themselves or any other employee. Now, if a security guard has been hired for the express purpose of apprehending criminals, then they will be expected to do things differently according to what the company has hired them for, and that's fine. But again, and finally, the very best thing they can do is be attentive, as they should be with all of your customers. Okay, so we're ready to move on to handling slow movers.
Okay, that's the next question. How do we handle the slow-moving items? Now, the best way of handling slow-moving items is not to have them, obviously, and that goes all the way back to merchandise and buyers. If you buy properly, you shouldn't have a lot of slow-moving items in your hands, but it happens all the time. So here are some of the ways you can deal with slow-moving items. Number one, you can charge more for the slow-moving items. That's a little different than conventional wisdom, but if you cannot utilize any of the other methods I'm listing here, because you're incurring carrying charges, inventory carrying charges on slow-moving items, to remain profitable on these items, idea may be to charge more. And sometimes, you know, it's funny how people perceive value, right? If it's higher price, they think, oh, much higher quality. So that's one thing to think about. It's a great idea, if you can get your supplier to agree to it, to have a return policy of items that are not successfully selling. And it may be 100% return or 50% return, so you share the kind of responsibility and share the loss between yourselves and your supplier. So that's always a good thing to do when you're negotiating or buying from your suppliers. You can put that clause into the contract. Now, of course, the standard thing and standard way to deal with slow-moving items is to blow them out. Have one big sale and just get rid of them, and then obviously make sure that you don't add more to slow-moving items category inventory. Now, another thing you can do, and obviously your reports from the POS going to show you maybe certain locations, if you're running a chain organization, certain locations may be more successful with certain items than the other locations. So an idea is to redistribute the small moving items to those stores that seem to be more successful selling them. Obviously, the transfer costs, transportation costs, etc., should be taken into consideration, but certainly that's one way of dealing with them. Again, with the suppliers, if you can manage to do this, direct drop shipment from the supplier, directly from the supplier to the stores that are successfully selling the items. Hence, this is a preventive measure to stop any building of slow-moving items in your inventory. Again, it's, some of the suppliers will be more than happy to do so. Now, just before throwing them out, your last option could be charitable donations. In a lot of countries, these charitable donations would be considered tax write-off, so you can at least recover some of your investment from the slow-moving inventory area. So these are the main ways of dealing with slow-moving items, but as I said right at the beginning, the best way is not to create them at all, right at the beginning. So, next question.
And that would be regarding interviewing. And we've had questions about both ways, actually, about retail people who are interviewing candidates to work in their stores, and we've had questions from retail people who are looking at going to interviews to obtain a position in retail management. So we're going to address them both briefly. As far as recruiting and hiring people to work in your retail organization, first of all, there's a process and best practices with actual questions and expected response outlined in our Success Guide, Winning at Store Management, just so you know. The main thing about interviewing candidates for positions in your retail store is to ensure that the candidate will be able to meet your expectations. That is, the expectations of the manager who will be responsible for the individual, should they be hired. Now, in order to ascertain that, the interviewer must go beyond the normal, everyday, I call them canned questions. They must ask things that will elicit responses that will actually tell the interviewer something relevant. You see, some people are very good, some candidates are very good at responding to the regular interviewer questions that are most often asked. They find it more difficult, however, to answer questions that are customized. For example, asking the candidate to describe a time when they had to handle a difficult situation and what the outcome was, which is a very standard question on many interview forms. It's very easy to answer with a standard and possibly even imagined response. But if you ask them to tell you in detail how their performance was measured in a previous job and how they measured up against targets and compared with other associates and how their immediate superior viewed their performance, well, I think pretty much they're going to have to tell you based on their experience, because it would be very difficult to fabricate a response to that question. The answer to this question should lead into more questions, more probing questions to follow up on what they've just told you. And I can't stress enough how important it is to get a feel for how this candidate views performance in the retail store. And if you're going to be successful, you need strong, performance-oriented people working for you. Another thing that should be understood is that it is okay to have silence while waiting for a candidate to respond to a question. This is a difficult one, but they need time to think and formulate their response. Many interviewers are uncomfortable with the silence, so they jump in to rescue the candidate by either repeating the phrase or by rephrasing it. I think we've all done that at some time or another. Of course, if the candidate asks you to please repeat or rephrase, that's fine, but it shouldn't be done otherwise. These silent periods also tell you something about the candidate. They may be careful, they may be very careful to articulate their response just right. They may be searching for the answer. They may be stuck and not have a clue how to answer or what you were even talking about. So it's important for you to pay attention, close attention to the silences and the comments that follow those silences. Now we're going to talk briefly about interviewing for a retail management position. Well, to be certain, retail employees must be very good at interacting with the public. We all know that. They can't be shy or miserable. They can't be looking for a position in retail just because they need a job. And if this is the case, they certainly can't let it show. So generally speaking, if you're looking for a retail management position, you need to be sure to get these things down pat, as simple as they may seem. To do research on the company, be punctual, smile, and dress impeccably. Be enthusiastic, sit up straight, no slouching or appearing laid back, and to be prepared with certain questions, as any interviewer will ask you if you have any questions for them. And although the above can be said for interviewing for any position in pretty much any industry, the one big difference is that you'll be facing the retail customer and managing others who are facing the retail customer in the environment. And that means that enthusiasm has to shine through. You have to appear to be very, very happy with a very positive mental attitude toward the public. Nothing negative may come out of your mouth, nothing. Even though you know retail is tough on the feet and the lower back, even though you know you have to work all kinds of different shifts and would rather have your weekends off, that can't come through. Well, obviously, if you're interviewing for a retail management position, then you already have decided to accept those things. Every position does have its drawbacks. The key is that you must not only be willing to accept them, but you have to appear to like them, and in fact wouldn't have it any other way. You also have to come across as being genuine. The point is, if you don't really like all of the things that come with retail management, then you should not be looking for a position in retail management. The retail industry needs dedicated individuals, advocates for retail, and believe me, interviewers that have been around a while can usually figure out whether you should be there or not. Okay, next we're going to talk about measuring productivity of inventory and sales.
Okay. We are extremely performance-oriented, if you have noticed from our website or our books, our success guides and everything else. Performance, we consider, is everything because, after all, we're not in, well, most of us anyway, we're not in not-for-profit business. We want to be successful. We want to make money. That's the idea of a commercial interest. So we look at a lot of areas in productivity. In our retail management workshop, we go through very, very deep into all 6 pillars of retail and how you measure the productivity in every single one of those areas. But for the benefit of this webinar and for the purpose of this webinar, we're going to look at 2 areas that are usually more critical than some others, and those are the sales and inventory productivity. Now, when we look at sales productivity, we have to look at, obviously, first and foremost, revenue. What's coming in? What are the sales we're generating? Because obviously, if we're not generating any sales, we don't have a business. So we have 2 things to look at. Sales per period, whatever the time frame you choose to compare your performance. It could be sales per hour. It could be sales per day. It could be sales per week, sales per month. Now, in retail in general, we always look at the sales at least in 1-day increments because we want to react if something is not going right. We cannot wait for a week or a month to correct the situation or finding out something is working great and do more of that. So usual period we choose for sales productivity measurement is per day, sales per day. Now, if we're running certain promotions, certain big advertising campaigns, etc., with deadlines involved, we may go down to measuring sales per hour. We just want to know hour per hour how we're doing, and we're going to use that information to motivate the troops and motivate the sales associates and do all sorts of other things. Maybe we're going to bring in more merchandise, whatever the case might be. In any event, we have to measure the sales and compare it to previous period. Usually it's done by comparing it to previous year. And also, we always compare our sales performance against the target, against the plan that we came up with at the beginning of our fiscal year. And those two comparisons are vital. Now, again, there's no time to get into huge detail here, but forecasting, which is going to give you the whole plan in terms of sales and everything else, becomes critical in terms of its accuracy, because when we compare the sales with respect to target, which is the forecasted amount, everything else in the company is derived from that number. So if you're not performing according to your target, your financials are out of whack. So you know that at least. So as soon as you see a significant deviation in the negative way from your plan, from your target, alarm bells have to start ringing. Now, the other indication, you compare it back to the previous year, provided that there has been no major changes in the marketplace, like a new development came in and a new subdivision got erected, so 20,000 people moved into that target area. Obviously, those things are going to make a huge difference in terms of numbers, but provided that no such big change has happened, indication is pretty strong when you compare your performance this period to the same period last year, how well you're doing. And financial analysts look at this very closely and carefully just to see, especially they look at the comp stores, which means the stores that are open for at least 12 months, so that they get a good understanding of how you're doing organically, how you're doing with the existing stores. Okay, so that's one thing we have to look at, sales. Second thing we're going to look at is average dollars per transaction. Why is this so important? Well, number one, we have to maximize each and every customer interaction. So we want to increase the dollar amount we're selling to the customer. But there's more to it. There's more to this than just increasing and maximizing the opportunity. This also shows that your salespeople, your sales associates are capable of selling expensive items. They're not just taking the easy road out and selling the lowest price or the advertised item, which usually the lower price item. So that is easy to do. By looking at this value, by looking at this key performance indicator, you're going to develop the idea of how well your sales associates are doing and how well they're trained, how well they're performing. And the last one I put here, obviously, we go to many other KPIs when time permits, but the third very important one is number of units per transaction. Very similar to average dollar per transaction, but it's not the same. In this case, we're talking about how many units we're able and capable of selling to the same customer, which means accessorizing the sale or selling related items or even unrelated items. It doesn't matter. But again, this shows you the capability and quality of your sales force in terms of introducing, presenting, and telling good stories to the customer, so customer wants to buy more units, more accessories, etc., etc. So these are the important KPIs for sales productivity, and everyone, as far as I know, some 75–80% of the retailers we work with always constantly measure these three, and then some more, obviously. Now, when we look at the inventory productivity, which is after your payroll, is probably the largest investment you make in your retail business, we almost automatically look at turns. How many times are we turning our inventory? And you can go down all the way to right from the total store or total company level. You can go down to categories, subcategories, even right down to SKU level because of very sophisticated computing systems nowadays. We can go all the way down to SKU level. So inventory turns, critically important. Percent slow-moving items in your inventory is very important. And GMROI, measuring GMROI is tremendously important in terms of getting the indication of your performance and productivity. Now, I'm going to talk about GMROI a little bit more. Here it is. GMROI, gross margin return on inventory investments, is a very critical and very important measurement, and calculated as gross margin percent times sales divided by average inventory. So usually you come to your average inventory by measuring your inventory levels every month. Starting from opening of first month, you collect every month end of month numbers, so you'll end up with 13 measurements, and the total of all inventory levels divided by 13 will give you your average inventory. And then you take your sales, and then you know your gross margin percent, which is reported to you from your POS. This could be done at SKU level, could be done in subcategory, category, line, vendor, in any shape or form, provided that you stay consistent with all the values, obviously. So if you assume we have a gross margin of 33.33% for an item, let's do a gross margin return on inventory investment for one item, one SKU. And the store's net sales over a period of 12 months is 24 million. I guess this example is going to be more like for the whole store. All right, so let's go to the whole of store, overall gross margin, overall inventory average, and overall sales. And store's net sales over a period of 12 months is $24 million. And during this time, as I explained how you calculate the average inventory, the store carries 4 million average inventory. Then your GMROI percent is 33.33 times 24 over 4, so that gives you 6, 24 over 4. 6 times 33.33 will give you 199.98%. Now, what this shows you, the beauty of this formula, it gives you one number for three things. Those three things are, number one, gross margin percent, which is your profitability on that item, category, store, company, whichever level you're measuring it. It gives you your sales ability, sales number, and it gives you the performance of your inventory levels. So all three items, all three important performance areas are combined in one formula. That's why GMROI is so important and so valuable. Now, what does that 199.98% indicate? It indicates every time you make an investment of $100 on inventory, you get back $199.98. So in this case, this is a very successful store because every time we put $100 into that store, we're getting 199.98% back. Hey, I want to do that all the time. This is a good deal. This is a good business. So obviously from that explanation, utilizing this version of GMROI calculation, because there are different versions. This is the correct one, by the way. There are lots of different versions of GMROI calculation, and some people like to make retail math really complicated. There's no complication. It's straightforward algebraic operations. There's 4 operations we're using. In this case, we're only using 2, multiplication and division. That's it. Retail math is not very complicated, but some people would like to make it complicated. I don't know why. Bottom line is GMROI is extremely important. Now, what is also great about GMROI, you can compare, and we received a question from Ian. I'm not sure if he's on this webinar. Ian from Ireland, and he was wondering how he was going to compare, for example, two suppliers. Well, GMROI is an ideal way of comparing two suppliers, and GMROI's calculation, the formula, brings them at the same level. It doesn't matter how much you're buying from one vendor compared to another. This one creates a comparison which would bring it down to the same base, and you could have apples-to-apples comparison. So if you're going to compare two suppliers, which supplier is giving you better productivity, you just measure their GMROIs, all right? You measure the gross margin you're making from that supplier, you measure the sales you're making from that supplier, and you measure the average inventory you have carried from that supplier, put it on in this formula, and then you will see. And then do the same for the second supplier, and then whichever one gives you better, higher GMROI is the better supplier. Very simple. And this gross margin return on investment, we take it all the way to square footage, payroll, all sorts of other pillars that we have in retail business, and we do that in our training sessions. So GMROI, gross margin return on investment concept and calculation is critical and very useful for all retailers. Now, next question is measuring advertising effectiveness. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. There's no way of excluding all other variables in this calculation. You know, when we measure sales, it's black and white. Have we sold it or have we not sold it? That's simple and very scientific. But when it comes to advertising, we advertise, and then there's a whole bunch of other factors that affect our business that day or that week, like weather, like other external events, all sorts of things. But nevertheless, we have to figure out somehow if we're getting at least our money back that we're spending on advertising. So what we're going to do, we're going to track traffic before, during, and after the campaign. So say you're doing a campaign for a week, you're going to start a week before, during that week, and then the week after. And then you're going to do the same for sales. Before, during, and after the campaign, you're going to track your sales. And also, there are ways you can, if you're doing, for example, a print advertising, you could include a coupon so that people either bring that coupon or mail it to you, whatever way you're going to get them back. But people would do that if you provide them a little bit of a discount, and you see that all over the place. It's not a new concept. And you could also, if they're going to use the phone for information or ordering process, you can have dedicated phone lines with dedicated extensions. You can get those from certain companies. They supply that kind of stuff for you. And then you can track the response that you're getting from, at least in terms of awareness, in terms of people who saw the ad. And but really, bottom line is you should be preparing your advertising and your campaigns to increase your sales, because that's what the bottom line is. Everything else is secondary. So you're going to calculate your ROI by calculating the lift in sales and the profit that you received from that additional sales, and then you're going to look at how much you invested in that advertising campaign, and that's going to give you the return on investment. As we speak, we're developing more sophisticated and better ways of measuring advertising effectiveness, but again, certain algorithms like business intelligence stuff gets gets in. Without business intelligence, it's very difficult to answer these vague questions. And for business intelligence to answer these questions effectively, you must have excellent customer information. You have to know your customer inside out sideways. And we can develop ways to measure the advertising effectiveness a lot more accurately utilizing business intelligence. Okay, so that takes us to the next question.
Okay, we had some questions regarding responsibilities of the retail person in charge. This kind of assumes that there are times when we put someone in charge of the store that is not actually a part of the management team. So we refer to person in charge quite often. One of our subscribers asked us to describe the responsibilities outright. So we're going to try, but we need a little bit of information or background. Basically, as a designation suggests, the person left to run the store is deemed to be the person in charge. So they'll usually not have the same level of authority as a store manager or as an assistant or deputy manager, nor do they need it. But they must have the authority required to do the job properly. Otherwise, you can't hold the person in charge accountable, and that is why we see so many stores operating with seemingly no one in charge. Often when a customer enters a store with a problem, they're told that there is nothing that can be done and to come back when the manager is in. And this is beyond unacceptable. Unacceptable. Many, many times the person in charge could, in fact, handle the customer's problem, provided she or he has been empowered to do so. So it falls on the shoulders of management to ensure that. If you're leaving someone in charge of the store, then that individual must be allowed, authorized, and encouraged to be in charge. They must be able to look after customers' needs. They are obviously going to have lower authority access levels on POS, and they may not have certain banking information or the safe combination or access to employee files or other confidential files, and that's fine. And they may not be able to answer certain questions that come in from head office, but they must have the authority, basically whatever it takes, to handle customer issues. Telling a customer to come back when the manager is in the store was going to do two things for sure, and probably more, none of them positive. One, it inconveniences and frustrates the customer. And two, it diminishes the person in charge and the manager in the company for that matter. So when we talk about the duties and responsibilities of the person in charge and about empowerment, some may think that they should have the same duties and responsibilities and authority as the manager would, but that would be incorrect. Obviously, there are things the manager does and is accountable for that the person in charge would not do or be accountable for. For instance, if an associate wants to schedule a special day off, the person in charge can just defer that for the manager to decide on. Or if head office calls to find out something and it turns out it's confidential information, well, the person in charge has to defer that also. Basically, the regular daily operation of the store is what the person in charge must be able to handle. This includes the everyday routine type of duties like opening, closing, scheduling breaks and lunches, replenishment, daily paperwork, fixing displays, ordering supplies maybe, directing associates in their work, store maintenance, processing shipments, and most importantly, ensuring that all customers are being looked after and sold to and exercising the authority she or he has in order to handle customer issues. All of what we've just discussed applies to a person in charge for a shift or two every so often. If this individual that's put in charge, if they're put in charge often, then clearly more training is needed to take place, and perhaps they should be considered for promotion to the management team. Always remember that when you expect someone to be responsible for something, you must give them the authority to get it done. Now, just in closing today, we are finished with our Complimentary Retail Answers webinar. We certainly hope you have enjoyed being a part of this. This is the first in a series of Retail Answers webinars. Watch your inbox for the announcement of the next one.
We have some questions that we can address once you finish. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, one question here is, let me put that. When we have a very high quality product with high price due to the high quality, and it's considered to be a real slow-moving item, what is the most proper recommendation for that? Now, gross margin, GMROI is your answer. Because obviously certain products are going to move slower than the others. For example, obviously perishables move very fast. In a supermarket, lettuce has to move in 2 days. Otherwise, it's going to be thrown out. And compare that to jewelry store where turns are a lot slower because the price point and usually profit levels are much higher. So just put your items into GMROI calculation because GMROI will reflect the high profitability. The margin is going to be much, much bigger. And then you can determine which items, which categories, which subcategories are the problems. Because once you put them all on GMROI column and calculate GMROI for each one of them, then you're comparing them apples to apples. So I hope that answers that question. Now, second one is where can we download the PowerPoint presentation? Anyone who is interested in getting the PowerPoint presentation that we showed here, please send a quick email to info@DMS Retail, info@DMS Retail, and just say Retail Answers PPT or PowerPoint, please, and we will send it to you. Next question. What has been your experience of retailers using true vendor-managed inventory to reduce this risk? My opinion on that is wherever you can do it profitably and effectively for your target customer. Now, there's a whole bunch of factors get in the way, obviously, when you're leaving it to the vendor to manage the inventory. You got to make sure you have certain level of control left, and otherwise, obviously, the vendor is going to skew certain things to their advantage. But everything else is being equal. I love vendor-managed inventory. It's the best way to do it, best way to go, because then, obviously, if there's any slow-moving inventory, they're going to be liable for that, and it's not going to be your problem. Okay, and what else do we know? Now, there's this, what are the best way to display merchandise in the supermarket? That's like a 6 months course. But let me give you just one thing. So I think the best way of displaying merchandise in a supermarket is testing it. You know, most cases, supermarkets almost exclusively put the milk all the way down deep, so go through all the aisles and everything else before you can get to milk. Very much the same for bread. Obviously, milk and bread being staples. Now, what about moving bread and milk to the front of the supermarket? How is that going to impact the overall situation? Because now, by putting it in front, you're basically improving your customer service. You're making it easier for your customer to get the staples quickly. So that's what I'm talking about when I say testing. So move things around, and then you know, take enough time for each different situation. You're going to be able to see what layout is giving you the best possible profitability and customer satisfaction. Otherwise, you know, if we have to handle this in a regular way, we need long time to talk about best ways to display merchandise, not just in the supermarket but anywhere. And that's about it. Those are the questions.
That's it for questions?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, so again, we will be announcing the next one. In the meantime, we hope you'll send more questions to training@dmsretail.com, and we'll do our very best to get your questions answered. You should also check out our website, because we have a webinar that's handled very much the same as this one is, and it's called Multi-Unit Retail Operations, Best Practices for Managing Multi-Unit Retail Operations. It's 8 hours, but it's spread over Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 5. It's 4 hours each, and there's a lot of great information in that. That's not from questions. That's a ready-made. We already have that seminar done. So anyway, on behalf of DMS Retail, Matt and I thank you for taking the time out of your day or night to attend this webinar, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Until then, all the success.
Goodbye.